CNN's chief climate correspondent, Bill Weir, says climate change doesn't mean the end of life, but it is the end of life as we know it. Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Bill Weir about life as we know it can be. Stories of people, climate, and hope in a changing world. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Bill Weir is CNN's chief climate correspondent. He's also a veteran anchor, writer, producer, and host who came to CNN in 2013 after a decade of award-winning journalism at ABC News. Bill, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Dan, it's so great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, this book is written to your son, so tell us about how he inspired the book.
Well, I have a daughter as well. They're 16 years apart, and I kind of use my kids as living, breathing units of time measurement. I look at their lifespans, and since I started covering climate, their lifespans got a lot more poignant, and I looked at my daughter when she was 11 and realized she's going to turn my age in the year 2050, the number that's in all these studies I read. And so I pitched a show at the time to CNN. They were looking for more documentary series like Anthony Bourdain's, which was a new success. And I said, what if I went to the wonders of the world and wondered what would be left of them when Olivia's my age? How many tigers in India? How many elephants in Botswana? Will Venice still be above water? And how many glaciers in the Alps? And they said, yes, greatest green light of my life. And so we shot 3 seasons in almost 30 countries and got to visit sort of the happiest, healthiest, the best of societies in some of the most beautiful places. And then I became the main climate guy after 2016. And I went through a divorce. And with my new family, my partner didn't think she could conceive, although she very much wanted to be a parent. And much to our surprise, she got pregnant. And I'm at age 52 holding my new little son, delighted he's here. My daughter delighted he was there. But looking out at this world in lockdown and just living on a steady stream of scientific peer-reviewed dread about what was going to happen to this kid's planet, I started writing these letters sort of as a cathartic record of what was going on outside. I was covering the George Floyd protests. I was going to Brazil to see them dig mass graves for COVID. And so the first early drafts of this book were really dark. I was supposed to turn it in a couple of years ago, but I'm glad I didn't. And events happened, and I met enough people as I started focusing on ways for my kids to build stronger, more resilient lives. Like, where should they live? What kind of house should they build? What kind of food will they have? It really inspired me as I met all these dreamers and doers who were tackling the things that I was worried about around the bottom of our pyramid of needs, our air, our water, our temperature, shelter. And in the end, I came away much more enthused and inspired and filled with agency. Like, if we could only get folks to just hear this story about this development, man, how much better we'd all be off. We would be. And so just the words climate change have been demagogued and infused with such loaded fear that people don't talk about it, even people who care about it. And the great movements in history, whether it was beating the Nazis or the civil rights movement, came when neighbors and strangers joined together for a greater good because of a story that they believed in, and they wanted to go beat that evil, or they wanted to change that wrong. And Dr. King didn't say, I have a nightmare, he said, I have a dream. And I don't think we talk enough about the dream of cleaner, more cohesive, better designed, smarter, more prosperous communities with the tools that we already have right now. It's just a matter of changing the story.
Well, you start from the beginning of the book, and you say it's not the technology that's going to save us in the future, although that's very important. You say it's really the stories that are more important. So tell us a bit more about why you feel that's the case.
Well, it's, for most of human history, here's a funnier example. I'll start with this one. It occurred to me the other day that we're told the story that to really show our love for someone special in our lives, we should spend 3 months' salary on a diamond. Diamonds are forever. Diamonds are precious and rare and the ultimate gift. When in fact, there are gigatons of diamonds underground, above ground. It rains diamonds on other planets. What is the rarest substance in the known universe is a tree, is wood, And so that's a story that shapes our culture, it shapes our buying habits. And for most of human history, we burned the fuels that were abundant and cheap. We burned dung or trees or whales and then kerosene, coal. And now, for the very first time in human history, thanks to ingenuity, the two cheapest fuels ever created are solar power with storage or onshore wind. And that's why Texas is the greenest state in the United States. Despite their politics, their ideology, the fact they have their own grid, they have so much abundant sun and wind energy that electricity was free, a couple of Sundays ago for 6 hours. And now there's a race of storage and to catch that and hold it in thermal batteries, hold it in, different forms of storage, natural, chemical, pressure of the earth, and enough to run factories, and Kansas is a fantastic example. Like half of your power comes from the wind. And so the story about that is very different if you hear it from a petrochemical lobbyist, who will tell you that we absolutely need to keep burning stuff. And they want to be the last company to burn the last barrel. That's what I mean by just the story. And also, I sort of reflect on my own choices and the stories that I marinated in growing up and how they shaped me and how I came from the TV generation of, preference by L'Oreal because you're worth it. That was written as a feminist actual line, but it became one of the most successful advertising slogans because it equated our self-worth with our consumption and like what we buy and what we drive and what we live in. And I didn't ever gave a second thought to the quality of my air and water. The Clean Air Act had cleaned, it was pretty gunky when I was a kid, but it had cleaned it up enough so I didn't have to think about it anymore. Or if our shelter made sense with skinny walls and a giant air conditioner instead of the other way around. But when you become an old dad, you start thinking about this stuff. And there was something empowering about me just sort of imparting it as a letter to my kids, both as a record of how much I cared about their futures, but a way to sort of preach to myself. A lot of this is aspirational. I live in an apartment that has a D rating from the city for energy efficiency. And, but when I build that dream cabin somewhere, I want my son to think about it in these terms.
The great thing about your book, because a lot of books that are written about climate change are all gloom and doom, but your book, as the subtitle indicates, offers hope. So you've been covering this in your professional career as a reporter and an investigative person doing these series. Where do you see the hope? Where do you see the technology and the human spirit to deal with these problems?
For a long time, I had to ask folks to imagine things because, the results of a warmer planet just hadn't become as obvious as they are now, and it's going to get a lot more obvious. We don't, our brains don't have the capacity to think in these timescales. And what I try to remind folks when I'm on the air at CNN for another, March was now the hottest ever, is to remind people that it is also one of the coolest marches for the rest of your life. And the things we took for granted. I was just on the air talking about, Dubai in the middle of the desert in the Arabian Peninsula got a year and a half's worth of rain in 12 hours because the atmosphere just is able to hold that much more moisture and dump it over a place that was not built for the drainage of Singapore, And so we're in a new planet. Our Goldilocks Earth, unfortunately, is gone. We have to prepare for this next one. And so I think we have to be clear-eyed about the challenge. It's the biggest challenge. And every community is going to deal with it differently. And where they are in sort of in the 5 stages of grief about the changes will largely determine how much safety they can build in. You know what I mean? But I was in Hurricane Ian, and this was the big storm, costliest in Florida history. It hit a couple of years ago. I was in Punta Gorda on the Gulf Coast when it came ashore, and most of the counties I was in, Charlotte County, Lee County, were plunged into darkness, flooded, Category 4 or 5 cusp winds, and just a huge storm surge. But then 15 miles inland was a community called Babcock Ranch, where the lights never went out and they never flooded. And it was the first solar-powered town in America, created by an NFL lineman, guy who played for the Packers and Cowboys named Sid Kitson, who went into real estate development and was a staunch environmentalist and thought, what if we can build with nature instead of against it? And he bought this huge, big chunk of land, gave most of it back to the state as a preserve, and then built within the natural flow patterns of the wetlands. 100% solar powered, did a deal with Florida Power and Light, and now, having survived that, the line to get into Babcock Ranch, he can't build homes fast enough, because now we have a story that people can, regardless of whether the politics or what you thought of the climate crisis, or even if there is one, I want to live over there where the lights don't go out in a hurricane. And it's just the practicality. Another story that inspired me was during Hurricane Michael, which hit biggest ever to hit the Panhandle. Under that storm was an NFL wife named Annette Rubin, who met her husband when he was playing for the Seahawks. She's from the Pacific Northwest, had never been through a hurricane. Brand new mom, 12-week-old baby, and she's Googling, what's the building code in my county? Like, if this thing is coming right for us. And it missed them, and her house survived, but it rattled her so much, and she was so taken by all of her neighbors with the frog in the pot mentality, as she called it, of having hurricane parties or going to bed. And like, this is just the normal. It's like, I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to spend half the year worried about my house blowing down. And so, with no experience in construction, she started a business where she imported a technology from Italy, who was invented by an engineer looking to build earthquake-proof homes with readily available material. And his innovation is to come up with these panels that are basically insulated. You have styrofoam in the center, and you spray concrete on the outside of them. So sprayable rock. So that, rock is great. The Romans proved that rock is great, but it's hard to insulate. But this hack now makes these panels are so light and easy to set up, and they can be a straight wall or a curved wall or stairs or a roof or an airport or a park bench. You just spray it. And that was so inspiring to me. She's not in it for the profit motive. There's better ways, better industries to go into. If she wanted to make money in construction, she would go build stick frame homes like the guys do after every hurricane. Instead, she's like, let's break the cycle here, and come up with a house that lasts 200 years and is a lot easier to maintain and a lot more energy efficient. So whether it's mitigation or adaptation or folks, I took some solace from the giants of sort of psychology and thinking of, how to process through losing these landscapes. And so there's a lot in there. That is my first book. And so it's sort of a stew of a lot of ideas that have been bubbling for a long time.
Now, you do go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs throughout the book and demonstrate how climate change is going to change those things, as you say, which is encouraging. It's not the end of life, but it is the end of life as we know it, and it's going to be different. And in order for life to continue on this planet, as you mentioned the word adaptation, we're going to have to adapt. So what are some of the other kind of technologies that you're seeing that maybe will help us make those adjustments?
Sure. Yeah, I think, the big one is heat. Heat already kills more folks, than other natural disasters. And as we've seen in recent years, there was a sense that because of the jet stream is like a belt at the top of the planet holding the cold air up there and having pretty consistent weather patterns, that if you lived in the northern latitudes, if you lived at, the 47th parallel, which goes from like Buffalo or Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, across the top, north of Chicago up there, that's like a great latitude to start. But then recent years, they've had 122-degree heat domes that just park over places in British Columbia or in Yorkshire, England. And the homes just aren't built for that. So older folks in older homes are super vulnerable to that. And so cooling now is becoming, there are now chief heat officers in Phoenix and LA and big cities in Spain and Southern Europe who think about how do we literally physically lower the temperature in our cities, with tree canopies. They're in Spain, they're bringing back this 1,000-year-old invention of wind catchers and canats, they're called, like underwater canals where you catch the breeze, pipes underwater is cooled, and you can cool entire city blocks in sort of a very nature-based solution. Reflective paint. LA has already painted millions of square feet with paint that reflects heat. A team at Purdue came up with the whitest paint ever created, which can reflect 99% of solar radiation back into deep space and literally physically cool a structure by 10 to 15 degrees. There's new technology in clothing for people who work outside in Phoenix or Dubai, and all these biometric, tech, where if an employer does want to monitor the health of they can do it in real time through sweat sensors and these things. Construction sites could move probably overnight. That'll be an over midnight, a graveyard shift, which creates noise at night. There's all these sort of shifts. A metaphor I use at one point that struck me, I came across, my little boy loves animals, and story time changes when you become a dad as a climate reporter. And the story of the camel, which I did not know, but recent fossil evidence tells us that the camel is from Canada originally. And the big hump of fat and the feet that we think were made for big sand dunes originally, were started to evolve in the boreal forests of Canada. And then a few of them wandered over the Bering Land Bridge and changed everything about themselves. The eyelids that were for blizzards got even better for sandstorms, the way they sit in the sun. And they're a model of adaptation, and how we don't have thousands of years to do that physically. But if you've seen the movie Dune, where the hero, the Fremen, are supremely adapted to this hostile, desert planet where you can't go outside in the middle of the day, it'd be nice to start thinking like the Fremen if you live in those kinds of places. But then along the coasts, like how do you deal with those changes? I was just in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, and where they've watched the high tide get higher and higher and higher, and every decade or so would have to replenish their beaches and bring in some sand. This year they bought 15,000 tons of sand, $600,000 spread among 100 and so homeowners. It washed away in a single storm because they'd never seen storms like this before. And when you talk to them, some people don't think it's climate change, and they just think it's bad luck, as you always do after a really epic storm. Meanwhile, the neighbor's like, I used to think that, but look at the trends. This is not. We need to now we have to think about putting our house up on stilts, or, the next door neighbor can't afford to do that. Do they retreat? And then what happens to insurance? So it's all of these psychological dramas folks are going to have to, sort of deal with in real time. And again, if people don't talk about it because they don't want to be the buzzkill, it's hard to process. It's hard to come up with a plan. It's hard to reach that acceptance level of the 5 stages. Go, okay, our beach is going away. What do we do? What's the best we can do? And now's the time to build that trust, I think, about community, to brace for whatever may come. And while I didn't ever think about the bottom of Maslow's pyramid of needs, and he wrote that theory on human motivation in a time of peaceful abundance, and now we don't have the luxury anymore. And I argue that if we can connect with our neighbors and our communities around our air, shared water, land, understand it more, appreciate it more. The guy who's really good at, spreading it, who enjoys dispensing information to the community and wants to go to meetings of the utility board, deputize him to keep us informed and engaged. And if somebody's good at accounting, they can help out the bird, conservation folks. And so, I think that when I grew up, the phrase was to think globally and act locally. And these days, if you think globally for like 5 minutes, you want to crawl into a bottle. It's so depressing. But those are the times when, whether you're in Lawrence, Kansas, or where I live in Brooklyn, or northern wilds of Alaska somewhere, to really forcefully, and especially in an election year, maybe lean across the fence and invite somebody on a hike you wouldn't otherwise and talk about what's going on.
Well, there's much more in this book that we won't have the time to talk about. It's filled with stories about people and climate change and hope, which is a nice change for a book about climate change. And since we can't cover everything that's in the book, what would you say are the key concepts that you hope people are going to take from it?
Just that we're really just all made of stories. All of our what seems so permanent in our lives, corporations or borders or currency or flags, are all stories that have been changing. Everything's under constant revision. And we can tell a better story about the future for ourselves and our kids, that the tools, the technology is already here and just warming up. There's so much innovation in the pipeline when it comes to earth repair. And ultimately, that what I'm trying to message to my kids is, as we live in this golden age of isolation, we have these screens that make life so convenient and frictionless, but lonely. And we really now more than ever need handshakes and hugs and working out in the sun together, working up a sweat to bring back a habitat in the backyard. And that by filling the bottom of the pyramid of needs for your neighbors, you're going to fill the top of the pyramid of your pyramid for love and esteem.
Well, the book is Life as We Know It Can Be, Stories of People, Climate, and Hope in a Changing World by Bill Weir. Bill, thank you for talking with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Dad.
Now, if you'd like to purchase Life as We Know It Can Be, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors on a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.